Welcome to this video on the future of emergency management, sharing findings from the Emergency Management Organizational Structures, Staffing, and Capacity Study. Including data from local, state, tribal, and territorial agencies nationwide, the study is the largest assessment of its kind ever conducted. Beyond covering some of the study's key findings, we lay out 4 strategies for emergency managers to help tackle many of the capacity challenges validated by the report. Let's begin by asking, who supervises or oversees emergency management? For many of the public safety senior leaders watching this video, you are likely the emergency manager, regardless of your official title. This mirrors exactly what the national data tells us. The data shows that public safety leaders are often the de facto emergency managers. More than half of local emergency management agencies operate with 1 full-time employee or fewer, with nearly a quarter having 0. The majority are housed within fire departments, law enforcement, and executive offices. So how did this study come to be? A group of Center for Homeland Defense and Security alumni, Justin Cates, Emily Pelliccia, and Emily Martuscello, discussed the need for research on the true capacity of emergency management in November of 2022 at the International Association of Emergency Managers Municipal Caucus. Although there had been previous studies looking at the capacity of state or county emergency management over the years, there were many gaps across the entire emergency management enterprise. Since there was no one taking on this research, the goal would be to lead a practitioner-driven survey to study themselves. In 2023, relationships between the alumni and Argonne National Laboratory researchers uncovered a shared interest in the topic of studying national emergency management capacity, leading to a much more ambitious project. Through their networks and with partnerships with the major emergency management associations, a plan and funding was put together to conduct the most comprehensive national study of emergency management organizational structures, staffing, and capacity. Funded by FEMA, Argonne expert researchers worked with practitioners to develop the survey questions which were released to local, state, and territorial practitioners in August of 2024. Throughout 2025, Argonne conducted rigorous analysis of the collected data which documented substantial variation in emergency management organizational models across jurisdictions, even among communities of similar size and risk. The survey provided key insights into the core constraints on emergency management capacity, structure, staffing, and scope. These are the pillars we need to strengthen. First, we have structure. What we learned in the study is local jurisdictions with independent or freestanding emergency management agencies are more likely to report being able to meet community needs than those housed under other departments. Next is staffing. As we mentioned, more than half of local emergency management agencies operate with 1 or fewer full-time employees, many part-time or dual-hatted. Last is scope. A significant share of emergency management directors report additional professional responsibilities that limit the time they can devote to emergency management activities. Here is the concern. This was the snapshot of capacity back in the summer of 2024. Since this data was collected, there have been significant changes in grant funding and new constraints placed on emergency managers. But despite the industry turmoil over the last year, we've seen a lot of advocacy for the same ways of doing this work and the same ways of funding it. How do we use the insights from this study as an opportunity to adapt to the new environment? We think there are 4 practical moves to transform emergency management. Align on value, do the right things, measure your impact, and tell the right story. Let's jump into our first recommendation, align on value. In 2007, FEMA's higher education program and the nation's major emergency management professional associations came together in what was the last known semi-official effort to define emergency management. They defined emergency management as the managerial function charged with creating the framework within which communities reduce vulnerability to hazards and cope with disasters. In recent years, there's been a noticeable shift in emergency management. Instead of seeing the emergency manager as a strategic managerial function, many stakeholders and constituents see them as a slack resource, without much to do between severe weather events. This has resulted in the emergency management function serving as a catch-all for unexpected issues and tasks that other agencies don't have the time to do. This has ranged from managing a jurisdiction's housing crisis to serving as the de facto grant writer to obtain SCBAs for the fire department. It's included maintaining generators and traffic control equipment, and overseeing the permitting process for special events. In recent years, many emergency managers have embraced these additional responsibilities as an effort to elevate the value of emergency management, especially if it brings grant funding to the jurisdiction. At the same time, the term scope creep has become pervasive during conversations within the emergency management professional community. Many note that they are spending more time in the minutiae of overseeing construction projects and maintaining equipment, rather than coordinating and advising the agencies where these functions are more naturally aligned. The Argonne study validates these concerns, noting assignment of tasks outside of emergency management's core responsibilities is consistently cited as a top challenge, especially in mid-size and large jurisdictions. We think that much of this disconnect comes from misalignment between leadership and stakeholders on what value emergency management actually brings to the table within the jurisdiction. In other words, where does emergency management excel? Where are they a differentiator? What is emergency management's value proposition? If you're everything, you're kind of nothing. The term value proposition is likely familiar to those of you who have heard of Andrew Osterwalder's business model canvas. The business model canvas is a strategic one-page template used to visually map out a company's value proposition, infrastructure, customers, and finances in 9 sections. While the business model canvas was designed to help a startup bring products and services to market, we think the framework can also serve as a useful tool in laying out the key elements of a well-balanced emergency management program, regardless of whether it's being developed from the ground up or has been in place for years. Jurisdictions often organize their emergency management programs around 2 sections of the canvas: the activities that they think they should be doing and the associated people and equipment they need to do it. This approach could be rooted in institutional isomorphism, coined by Paul DiMaggio and Walter Powell in 1983. The idea in institutional isomorphism is that in order to gain legitimacy, an organization will adopt the same processes and structure as its peers, sort of an easy-button approach. For instance, your neighbor is conducting emergency management training, so you should too. Or your neighbor operates a mobile command post, you should too. Focusing an emergency management program on resources and activities, rather than an aligned value proposition, often leads to the acquisition of unnecessary assets and engagement in duplicative work that is more naturally aligned in another agency. Instead of simply mimicking the activities and resources of other emergency management programs, we propose that jurisdictions first understand each of their customers' unique jobs to be done, priorities, and desired outcomes. The emergency management program can include a variety of customers, including elected officials, other stakeholder agencies, and the jurisdiction's constituents, each with their own nuances. This might include the wastewater department needing to keep their infrastructure operating during severe weather, or the jurisdiction's citizens needing to be able to take protective action during a hazardous materials release. What pains do they encounter while doing these jobs, and what nice-to-have gains would make them easier? Equipped with a better understanding of each of their customers, the jurisdiction can design emergency management services to help them meet the desired outcomes, incorporating unique pain relievers and gain creators that may not be found within another agency. Some of you have likely heard the quote that has been misattributed to Henry Ford: "If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses." The development of a strong value proposition requires balancing sometimes uninformed customer desires with new innovative offerings and even traditional services from the emergency management portfolio. In today's resource-constrained environment, it also requires prioritizing some of the non-negotiable emergency management career-ender services, like ensuring the population receives timely and intuitive warnings, and that stakeholders can effectively share information and resources during a crisis. When we design products and services that satisfy a customer need or want, we obtain what's known as product-market fit, a strong indicator that the product or service will be successful. Much like fit can help to forecast product success, establishing fit between emergency management's value proposition and customers can also create a more secure future for your program in resource-constrained environments. This leads us to our second recommendation, which is to do the right things. Only once we have aligned our value proposition with our customers, we can assess the necessary activities and the associated resources to perform them. How do we focus our limited human resources on the right activities that help us meet the desired outcomes of our customers? The Start, Stop, Change, and Continue framework, developed by Deloitte's Center for Government Insights, can serve as a useful tool for jurisdictions to assess the wide range of emergency management activities being performed and assess if they are necessary to accomplish that value proposition. Most of these categories are pretty straightforward, as this is based on the Start, Stop, Continue framework that you've likely seen in performance reviews. For instance, in the Continue category, we want to identify the key activities underway that may be required by law or regulation, or where emergency management provides unique expertise. We would hope that those non-negotiable emergency management career-ender activities we described earlier would be located in this category, things like operating the Emergency Operations Center or testing the alert and warning system. The Start category provides opportunity to assess your customers' prioritized desired outcomes and identify if there are new activities that must begin. As an example, many jurisdictions desire resilient community services for their constituents, ranging from trash pickup to the timely answering of 911 calls. But despite its importance, continuity of operations is often seen as a lower-ranked collateral duty of emergency management. We could argue that emergency management programs could greatly increase their value by focusing more of their time, improving the reliability of their jurisdiction's day-to-day services during crisis. The change category is becoming more and more important in the era of increased automation and the use of artificial intelligence. The Argonne study notes that administrative and compliance tasks consume a considerable amount of time for emergency management agencies at all levels of government, and many of these tasks are associated with the grant-dominated nature of our business. There's significant opportunity to redesign this work by leveraging additional automation and emerging AI agents to reduce administrative toil and even create a temporary competitive advantage over other agencies. Defining activities that should stop is likely the most difficult part of this exercise. Gabrielle Adams, a researcher at the University of Virginia, who has spent a considerable amount of time studying the strategy of subtraction when designing systems, notes, "When people try to make something better, they don't think that they can remove or subtract unless they are somehow prompted to do so. It can be tough to determine where it makes sense to divest responsibilities to another agency or jurisdiction that has more expertise or a more natural alignment. But should emergency managers be maintaining generators and traffic control equipment instead of public works? Or how about overseeing flood mitigation construction projects instead of your jurisdiction's engineering team? And imagine how much time emergency managers could save by leveraging the jurisdiction's finance department instead of pretending to be an accountant." But today, identifying where to cut is not just about optimizing where emergency managers spend their time. Programs are being confronted with real resource constraints and must find ways to allocate their limited human resources to preparing for and responding to the most likely risks within their jurisdiction. This will lead to the discontinuance of some activities that emergency management has been associated with for decades. To address the difficulty of stopping some activities, we propose some simple rules to help emergency managers determine when they are no longer the appropriate resource for a specific activity. The simple rules approach comes from Donald Sull at MIT and Kathleen Eisenhart of Stanford, who researched the value using a handful of guidelines tailored to the user and the task at hand, which balance concrete guidance with the freedom to exercise judgment. One category of rules outlined in their book Simple Rules are boundary rules, meant to help guide the choice of what to do and not do without requiring a lot of time, analysis, or information. Using their approach, we've crafted a few boundary rules that we think can help emergency managers with the tough decision of where to subtract from their programs. First, and the most obvious, we don't want to work on activities that don't support our value proposition. If it doesn't support what our customers are asking for, we shouldn't be doing it. The flexibility behind the simple rules approach lends itself nicely to the second rule. As we know, each emergency management program will need to work around their jurisdiction's varying governmental authorities and capabilities. The emergency management program should not perform activities that are similar to those performed by another department or jurisdiction. This is most often seen in enabling functions like maintaining equipment, construction project management, or conducting grant administration. Emergency management works best when it provides risk-informed advice to entities doing this type of work every day, like a fleet department, engineering office, or grant writer. But often we see emergency management consumed in the details of executing these very specialized tasks when there are more suitable places for them to be located. One could argue that emergency management serves as a force multiplier, helping to take on these activities, preventing burden on other departments. We disagree. If they need someone to manage post-disaster finances, they need to hire another accountant, not an emergency manager. Finding activities to divest to other agencies helps to clarify roles and responsibilities and prevent duplication of effort. It's likely that the activities covered by the third rule have gotten us into the most trouble in the last few years. There's no question that emergency managers generate immense value in coordinating the response to acute shocks. But in recent years, many emergency management programs have increasingly found themselves front and center, coordinating the response to chronic, high-profile community stressors. There is sound logic for emergency management's involvement in long-term stressors, even if the move is often motivated by the theatrical benefits of holding a press conference in the Emergency Operations Center, or the ease of using a state of emergency to circumvent inconvenient bureaucratic processes. Much like how they coordinate the response to shocks, emergency management can leverage their large network of partners to create ad hoc organizational structures to efficiently share information and resources. But if emergency management's involvement lasts beyond the stabilization of that stressor, if that's even possible, it has become a job worthy of a dedicated resource and should be reassigned to the agency or jurisdiction it's most naturally aligned with. If there is no appropriate home for the stressor, the jurisdiction's chief executive should appoint an administrative czar, We've also developed some stopping rules, which you'll find in the resources at the end of this presentation. Think of these as a transfer of command to help navigate these types of situations. Whereas our first two recommendations are focused on improving the value of the emergency management organization, our third looks to improve the way we measure the value it creates. Emergency management programs have long struggled with performance indicators, if they even measure anything at all. Those that do often focus on inputs, like the number of incident command system trainings offered, or outputs, like how many citizens have signed up for the community's alert system. It's tough to blame them when the most familiar and structured assessment methodology used, FEMA's Stakeholder Preparedness Review, focuses exclusively on these types of input and output metrics. A quick search of the Homeland Security Digital Library points to dozens of CHDS theses on the topic of measuring effectiveness and return on investment, with many referencing the shortfalls of the THIRA and SPR process. So what can we use instead to better measure the value of emergency management within a jurisdiction? Rather than implying value based on how much grant funding we brought back to the community, or worse, how many grants we applied for regardless of whether they were awarded, we recommend a shift towards measuring the impact we contribute toward our stakeholders' desired outcomes. For instance, instead of tracking the number of residents that have subscribed to your emergency notification system, can we assess the compliance rate for taking a protective action? In cases where measuring an outcome is not possible, the outputs we measure should demonstrate clear progress towards the larger, desired community outcomes from our stakeholders. The stakeholders overseeing our budgets fund outcomes, not effort. To be clear, we know outcomes are the hardest to come up with and measure, and of the strategies we're recommending, this one has the most knowledge gaps. But we present this with the hope that emergency management practitioners and academia can help address those gaps, especially by identifying measurement strategies that work in other disciplines. According to the Argonne study, 39% of local agencies report that stakeholder confusion about the role of emergency management is one of their most significant challenges. We wonder if some of this confusion is self-inflicted and a product of the evolution of the EM field. Almost weekly, we come across photos on social media of emergency managers moving boxes around on forklifts or handing out Narcan at a community fair. A Google image search for emergency management primarily yields pictures of urban search and rescue specialists and their canines working through rubble. There's no shortage of emergency management getting coverage in both traditional and social media outlets, but are we telling the right story? Our fourth recommendation is to frequently and clearly articulate the unique value that emergency management contributes toward your customers' desired outcomes. Be strategic in this messaging, and greatest attention should be placed on the person you report to and that approves your budget, followed by your friendly advocate stakeholders, and lastly, your constituents. When emergency management staffing and funding are at risk, the profession often falls back on hyperbole, issuing broad statements like, "Lives will be lost." It is difficult for decision-makers to take these claims seriously without a defined value proposition and the data to back up our actual impact. Let's take a look at a quick video to show this messaging done right.
Monday's gas explosion on Amherst Street unfolded quickly as firefighters and police focused on safety at the scene. Nashua's Office of Emergency Management was already coordinating what came next.
I don't have to fight fires. I don't have to fight crime.
Nashua is the only community in New Hampshire with a full-time independent emergency management department run by Emily Martuscello. From a deadly shooting to major fires, a plane crash, and now the gas explosion, her team coordinates with first responders on evacuation centers, public works, utilities, and sometimes schools.
All of those different things, those are all things I can offload so they can focus on the mission at hand, which is usually a life safety mission that they're focused on.
On Monday, Fire Chief Steve Buxton says Martuscello's team was key in working closely with Greater Nashua Mental Health amid the evacuation.
She helped pull all of those people together so we could get an accounting to all the staff and patients that were on site. That was one of the greatest things that happened for me as an incident commander.
Coordination that includes partners like the American Red Cross.
And it's that confidence we have in each other that helps us. We'll just start moving.
In the school system, Monday's explosion hit during dismissal, impacting bus routes and communication with parents.
It's an immense help. It really, the coordination is just amazing.
The department also coordinates training and drills for incidents like Monday's gas explosion, which first responders say is very important to help them with their responses. Reporting live in Nashua tonight, I'm Mike Moses, WMUR News 9.
There are many cases like Nashua, where the emergency management program has successfully reinforced the unique role they provide to their jurisdiction. Unfortunately, we can also point to many examples rooted in confusion and unmet expectations. A quote from a recent external assessment of a major city's emergency management office: "There is a complete lack of faith in OEM among city operating departments. We don't trust them to respond and support us, or even understand what we do. We work around them." Or this quote about another emergency management agency from an after-action report: "Leadership did not correctly prioritize the emergency management office's responsibilities, opting to focus too much on external networking rather than training, policy creation and maintenance, and relationships with city agencies, namely the fire department and the police department." With looming budget cuts and tighter resource constraints, it's imperative that emergency managers have an ironclad value proposition, demonstrating that value will become even more complex as AI tools become increasingly intuitive at automating many of the tasks traditionally handled by a professional emergency manager. If we don't design our programs around value, we risk continuing to be relegated to tasks that ignore our strategic risk-informed expertise, if we aren't eliminated entirely. To survive their greatest test yet, long-term viability, emergency managers can leverage these 4 smart practices of aligning on value, doing the right things, measuring their impact, and telling the right story. At the Center for Homeland Defense and Security Alumni Professional Exchange in February of 2026, emergency managers Justin Cates, Emily Martuscello, and Emily Pelliccia discussed how they used these strategies at various points throughout their careers to sustain and elevate their programs. Justin noted that his experience developing an emergency management program in Nashua, New Hampshire in 2011 was drastically different than his approach in Somerville, Massachusetts in 2021, because he aligned on the value emergency management could bring to the table with his leadership and stakeholders. Rather than the chasing shiny objects approach he used in Nashua, he leveraged the business model canvas that he learned about through his graduate studies at CHDS while developing Somerville's inaugural emergency management program. As he describes in his CHDS master's thesis, Designing for Disaster, when he learned that there was a dedicated Office of Sustainability and Environment already conducting climate adaptation planning, he avoided taking on traditional hazard mitigation planning as it more naturally aligned and integrated with them. Additionally, Justin notes that his transition into private sector business continuity has helped him take a product and service lens to measuring emergency management's impact. For example, the use of service-level availability metrics, also known as uptime, from the software reliability engineering discipline, can also be used to measure the reliability of the jurisdiction's day-to-day products and services provided to constituents over a period of time. The jurisdiction's leadership, stakeholders, and constituents may agree that the library can have an uptime of 95% over a month, whereas a 99.99% uptime over a month would be a more appropriate metric for the jurisdiction's critical wastewater service. While the emergency management program does not control all aspects of the reliability of these community services, it can support these metrics by what it does best: planning, training, and exercising to prevent disruptions. Emily Martuscello also provided a few ways she has been able to use these strategies. During the City of Nashua's efforts to maintain their bond rating, Emily worked with the city's chief financial officer to identify scoring criteria used by the S&P evaluators. They found the continuity of operations plan gave them additional points towards their rating. Emily has also focused on making sure her emergency management program is doing the right things by utilizing artificial intelligence to redesign burdensome administrative activities, allowing her team to focus on the value-creating activities that humans are optimal for. Emily Pelliccia has been in the critical role of moving an emergency management program from a collateral duty within the fire department to one reporting to the jurisdiction's executive. She's leveraged the data from the Argonne study to help prevent many of the missteps seen by emergency management agencies that are overwhelmed and under-resourced. Although these 4 strategies incorporate intuitive and evidence-backed frameworks, the Argonne study highlights the need for a longer-term research agenda to assess the various orientations of emergency management structure, staffing, and scope, and recommend the models which are most effective. Perhaps future CHDS students may explore these as thesis topics. We also want to hear from you. What strategies have worked in your efforts to elevate your emergency management program status or obtain additional resources? Please reply in the comments to this video with any smart practices you would like to contribute. We're particularly interested in practical examples from other disciplines that emergency management may be overlooking. Thank you for watching this video. You can find more resources and connect with the presenters using the contact information and links provided here. The QR code will take you to more resources at bit.ly/value in EM.